So welcome to day two of this Triratna Sangha home retreat. I'm Shanti Garba, as I think most of you know from yesterday, co-founder and one of the conveners of the Triratna Sangha. And I'm delighted to introduce my friend Vajrashura this morning, who's going to be presenting this morning on the theme of the five liberations. So I know Vajrashura from the International Council and the UK and Ireland Area Council, where we work together exploring issues that affect the order and the movement. And I know him as somebody who's very engaged, very energetic, passionate, and very competent in different ways in organizing and helping things to move on. And we're also part of a subgroup, a climate and ecological emergency subgroup. Vajrashura, myself, and Viri and I, we've been meeting for the last couple of years, bringing these issues into the International Council. So I know Vajrashura is very passionate about this topic. So Vajrashura has been practicing the Dharma since 1999. He's worked at the Dublin Buddhist Centre since 2002 and was ordained in 2007. And he's led a full order life, helping the Sangha in Ireland, becoming men's Mitra convener for the Dublin Buddhist Centre, and then more recently becoming a private and a public preceptor. So he's a relatively new member of the Preceptors College. And he's passionate about the Dharma and how it can help the world. So he'll be talking about the five liberations, in particular, how an ethical life is a Dharma life. And a Dharma life is a life of love for self and world. In particular, he'll be exploring the framework of the five liberations to see how we can journey to simplicity, connection, and meaning. So let's give a warm welcome to Vajrashura. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Shanti Garba. So so my name is Vajrashura, and thanks for that warm welcome, and thanks to Zach and the Buddhist Centre for running this really great event. I don't think I need to say much more after that from Shanti Garba. So just to give you a sense of what the program will be, we're going to start off with a meditation now in a few moments, without much further ado, and then I'll give some input on the five liberations, as Shanti Garba has said. We'll take a break then after the talk. The talk will be about 25 minutes, though I can never be sure with my timings, I must confess. And then we'll go into breakout rooms after it'll be the same format as yesterday, pretty much. We're going to breakout rooms after the break, and for about 20 minutes or half the time that we have left. And then we'll come back and have a plenary session hosted by Shanti Garba, and we can put awkward questions to each other, or just bring back thoughts from the groups. And then we'll have a closing ritual to finish out the morning as well. So without further ado, let's just begin, as is always good to do, with some meditation. So what we're going to do is just a very straightforward, just a very straightforward but good metta bhavana, and I won't be leading it very much. I'll just help us to set up, remind us of the stages, and I'll just ring bells then. And in a way, what this is doing then is it's setting the emotional tone for the morning. Metta is the tone for the Dharma life, you could say. It is the basis of the Dharma life, and it is the basis for love for self and other. So I'll give you a moment or two to set yourself up, to make sure you're comfortable. The sit will be about 25 to 30 minutes. So when we've sorted out our posture, when we can sit comfortable, upright, alert, just settling into what it's like to sit here right now. Opening to the sounds we can hear. Opening to our surroundings, the room, the building, the area, the earth. Becoming aware of the context in which we're meditating. And allowing it in as best we can, rather than resisting any of it. And then turning towards our own experience of being seated here. Opening to the body. Perhaps particularly noticing the contact of our legs, our sitting bones, our feet with the floor or the chair or the cushion. And we can open our heart to the body, allowing it in, allowing ourselves to feel what the body feels, what the body is already feeling. Our bodies are imperfect, but they do allow us to do so much. So opening the heart to how the body feels. Even if that's somewhat tight or unpleasant. Just opening with tenderness to that. And if the body feels well, just relaxing and enjoying into that. Noting just how comfortable or uncomfortable we are, how much at ease we are or not within this experience of sitting here. Allowing that in with kindness. Opening to as much of ourselves as we can so we can bring it into the meditation. We can bring as much of ourselves as possible into the sit. And opening to the heart and the flows and ups and downs of the heart and our emotional experience. And allowing that in as well, as best we can. And keeping this open heart for ourselves as we move into the Metta Bhavana. Firstly, metta for ourselves. Metta for a good friend. Meta for a neutral person. Metta for a difficult person. equalizing our meta for all four people, and then expanding our meta out to all beings. And now just sitting for a few moments, letting go of the practice completely. So bringing the practice to a close and emerging from meditation in your own time. Okay, so you're very welcome to this morning's session. I think a couple more people have just joined us during that meditation. So my name is Vajra Shura, and I'll be talking for the next, I think, about 25 minutes or so. So make yourself comfortable. And so I wanted to start with a quote from Sangharakshita, who's the founder of our community, and the man I consider my teacher. So this is a quote from a talk he gave back in 1988, so quite a long time ago. He said, "I think as a movement, especially as an order, we need to take a much stronger stand on issues of this sort, perhaps play a more active part, at least in our individual capacities, in the environmental movement. After all, this is completely in accordance with the principles of Buddhism. In the course of the next 20 years, I would like to see our movement, I would like to see our order developing what I describe as a sort of ecological dimension. I would like to see some order members taking up this particular interest and working in this particular field from the basis of their Buddhist commitment, working perhaps even in some cases along with non-Buddhists who share this sort of concern, this sort of commitment, because it is something of very, very basic importance." So that's in a talk called The Next 20 Years, which is why he mentions 20 years there. And it's been very pleasing to see the Triratna Earth Sangha arising in the last wee while. And I've had plenty of chats with Shantigarbha about it. I haven't been so involved myself because I've just been, my other responsibilities in Triratna have kept me very over-occupied in a way, or overly busy. But I'm really delighted to see it happen and for the Buddhist Center to be putting on retreats like this. And what I'm particularly interested in is what can the Dharma offer in the whole ecological and climate emergency. What can the Dharma really offer? What kind of perspectives can it bring? And today I want to talk about the 5 liberations, and I'm very much indebted to Akupa for this material. So you heard from Akupa yesterday, if you were here. And I think he's done a lot of really brilliant thinking on this. And so this comes from some of his material, and obviously with my own thoughts as well. One of the main points that he makes is that environmentalism is an expression of Buddhist practice. It's an expression of a life of transformation, of love and care, of wisdom. And it's you know, fundamentally, Buddhism is about the problem of suffering and responding to suffering. And it's a question of looking at how we change and how we change the world and how the world can change. And it's a really central question, isn't it, in the Dharma and in the context of climate change and climate emergency. How do we change, and how do people change more generally? And a couple of points before I launch into the 5 liberations, but I think a really important point is that a lot of the things that cause the environmental crisis are also things which make us quite unhappy, more generally, and spiritually unhappy and spiritually unfulfilled. So a lot of the things that make us, that cause the environmental crisis, also are things that make us unhappy. So, one of the main, philosophical underpinnings of modern life, particularly in the developed world, is scientific materialism. And it has all kinds of consequences and offshoots and implications, particularly a sort of a consumeristic mentality that we have in the West, that if we have things and certain types of lifestyles and certain types of experiences, we will be happy. Yeah. And this has led to a lot of suffering, both personal suffering, spiritual suffering, and of course environmental suffering as well, because it's one of the biggest drivers of carbon emissions and resource usage. And there's also a certain type of materialism that comes from in terms of a view of exploitation of the world's resources that causes so much suffering as well, not just individually, but at a industrial level as well. And it's not that we have to live a Buddhist life here and work as an environmentalist here. One is an expression of the other. And I find the story of the Buddha really interesting in this regard. The Buddha saw suffering in the world, and he lived, the stories go that he lived in a palace, well insulated from the everyday suffering of the world. In fact, his father, the stories go, tried to completely insulate him from the sufferings of the world. And we can certainly lead comfortable lifestyles, certainly in places like in Dublin, where I live, or the UK, where we're somewhat insulated from the consequences of our actions, globally speaking. But the Buddha saw that he had to leave the palace. And I think one of the things about this is when we look at the world and we see things that are happening in the world, and I've been really struck lately by the warnings coming from the reports for the new IPCC report. And we realize the palace that we're living in isn't secure. And that's what the Buddha realized. The palace isn't a secure refuge. And we have to leave the palace. We have to leave the delusion of a sheltered life that can exist independent of the consequences of our actions. So I wanted to say that I think this is a real opportunity to bring a dharmic perspective much more deeply into our lives and into the world, the environmental crisis. And one of the things that I like about Akupa's framework of the 5 liberations is that they're a very positive way of looking at the joy that can come from doing this, rather than being overwhelmed by the scale of the problem, which is easy to happen. So these 5 liberations, they're based upon their expressions of the 5 great ethical guidelines, the 5 great ethical precepts given to us by the Buddha. And I'm sure, I don't know people's levels of experience here, but I'm sure we've all come across the 5 guidelines, the 5 ethical precepts. We chant them often every day in our Buddhist centers, the refuges and precepts. So the first of these liberations is the liberation that comes from not harming life. The liberation that comes from not harming life. And one of the things I always make sure to do when I'm teaching these in the center where I work at the Dublin Buddhist Center is emphasize how we eat, eating more kindly, becoming more vegetarian, more vegan. This was very much encouraged by the Buddha and by all schools of Buddhism. I'm sure I don't need to go into that here, given that you've all got some interest already in the environmentalism. So I won't go on about this here, but you know, it's the old question of, can we cause less harm by how we eat, how we consume? And what I really want to emphasize here as well is that this is a joy rather than a restriction. So there's a joy that comes from stepping lightly on the earth. There's a joy that comes from knowing you're causing less suffering through your actions. There's a lightness, there's a positivity, there's a delight that happens. And this is what I really want to emphasize today, that there is a joy that comes from Dharma practice that is good for us and good for the world around us, even in the face of a lot of very difficult things and suffering to take in. The other things I tend to emphasize in this liberation that comes from not harming life is just the joy of not taking from people, from future generations, things that haven't been freely given to us. And I think we are ethical beings, we are sensitive beings that feel our actions. So there's a joy from living well. Anyways, I'll leave that there because I want to talk more about the later ones of the other liberations, but I'm sure there's lots you could draw out there in the discussion groups. The second liberation is the liberation that comes from giving and sharing. So the liberation that comes from giving and sharing. I think the act of giving and sharing, the act of living on the basis of what we can give rather than what we can get, is a really radical act. It's a really radical act. I think consumer society that we probably all live in is fundamentally orientated around the idea that if we all act just out of what we can get, if we all act on the basis of getting, it will magically all work out well. You might have heard this phrase of the invisible hand of the market. You know, if we all act upon the basis of our self-interest, everything will seem all right. And while, you know, there's something in that can be teased out, overall, I think it's as crazy a religious belief as I've ever come across. You know, a lot crazier than many of the more extreme religious views I've heard in my time. But whatever about that, I really do believe that there's a joy that comes from living on the basis of giving and living on the basis of sharing. Personally, I've lived communally in Triratna, in communities for 20 years now. I've spent all that time living with other Buddhists, particularly other men here. I'm living with 4 other men here in our Buddhist community. And that's where I'm coming from my room here this morning. And I really believe in living communally, in living in the basis of sharing. But it's not just about how we live in our house, in our residence, obviously. It's about being in the world and living on the basis of giving. Yeah. And there's so much that can be said here. Very briefly, I'll just tell one story, which is that one of the great things that has happened for us here in Dublin during COVID is that we had to shut down the centre. We shut down the centre fittingly or ironically on St. Patrick's Day in 2020, wasn't it? Yeah. And we realized we couldn't function under the old economic model that we used to run the centre under, which is charging for courses in order to keep the centre going. So we decided, because we had gone online, just to offer everything for free. And lots of centres already do this. It's not anything particularly new in Triratna, but we just decided to make everything free. And then we encouraged people that we said to them, look, we're giving you the Dharma for free, completely for free. And if you then want to give back to the centre, to support the centre, to give the Dharma for free as much as possible, we would be really happy to receive that money. And we can't get away from money. You know, the person who ordained me once said, no money, no spiritual life. You know, if we don't have money, we can't operate in the world. You know, he's been a bit provocative there. But we can change how we relate to each other economically. And I thought, and one of the lovely things that has happened is that actually the centre has thrived in those 2 years. And now that we're reopening again, we're going to try and continue that model of mutual giving. And I think there is something, you can't underestimate the effect that that has on people and has on ourselves. And I wonder if we could bring that Dana economy into more and more of our personal interactions, not just financially, but just live with each other on the basis of what we can give rather than what we can get. And I think if we did that, that would have a radical effect on the world, and that could ripple out much more than we think. And I know that people are very moved to hear about that in our Buddhist Centre when we talk about that. And part of that, a great expression of that for me is living communally as well. And I do think that living communally is one of the things that we're going to have to do more and more to tackle the environmental crisis. So I'd really encourage you to think about that. And I also think that this retreat also, just to get a plug for Dana in, it's great that these retreats, the Buddhist Centre has a really good ethos of mutual giving as well. So if you're in a position to give money to this retreat too, Zach will share the link just before the chat. And I think mutual generosity is a radical act in an overly consumeristic, overly priced world. Yeah. So that's the second liberation. The next liberation is the liberation that comes from living a simple life. And I don't think, well, I'll come back to this in a few minutes. I think we have to do more than just look at our own consumer habits. But I think I grew up, I'm 45 now, and I grew up in the 80s, and I've always been really interested in the issues of the climate and so on. But one of the things that it's easy to get into is a sense that we're all going to end up living in a cave, living off half-cooked potatoes and feeling guilty about everything that we eat. You know what I mean? That was kind of the milieu in which I grew up in. And an enforced simplicity or restriction that's going to be awful. You know, that's just not very inspiring. And I think this is one of the main things I want to emphasize today, that one of the main things Buddhism has to offer is a really positive vision of living simply, of living with fewness of desires. Yeah, rather than it being a restriction, being a joy, a delight, a liberation. So the Buddha really encouraged us to live simply, live with fewness of possessions. He left, one of the first things he did when he left the palace was he gave away his rich clothes and shaved off his hair. And traditionally, when he became a monk or a nun, often what they would do was go to the cremation ground and sew together their robes from leftover rags of the bodies that were cremated there. So that might be a bit too extreme for us to do right now today, but I love the myth of it and the message of it. And he encouraged the monks and the nuns to live very simply. They had very few possessions. When their robes were worn out, they recycled them into blankets or mattress covers or foot mats. And they were very strict about what they could eat and when they could eat it, to discourage overeating and gluttony. And I think for us, while we may not be monks and nuns, we can live really simply. We can take the message of the Buddha to heart, and we can do that really joyously, I think, as well. And Sangharakshita, our teacher, has really emphasized this. And his point about simplicity is that we live simply, not out of self-denial, but so that what is truly valuable can shine through. So we live simply, not out of self-denial, but so that what is truly of value can shine through. One of the great modern sins, I think, is to be bored. Yeah, boredom is the great modern sin. We're not allowed to be bored. We're not allowed to have nothing to do. We're not allowed to live simply. But boredom is a really good thing. If we can really strip back our input, how we live, how we consume, the first thing that will happen is we'll probably be a bit bored. I certainly love getting intoxicated on my phone. But boredom allows something else to shine through. What Sangharakshita describes as an aesthetic simplicity. And one of my favorite quotes from Bhante, from Sangharakshita, is this one about simplicity. He says, "The truly simple life glows with significance, for its simplicity is not the dead simplicity of a skeleton, but the living simplicity of a flower or a great work of art." So I'll read that again. "The truly simple life glows with significance, for its simplicity is not the dead simplicity of a skeleton, but the living simplicity of a flower or a great work of art." Yeah. So I think that's really, really wonderful. And so a Buddhist way of life offers a life of beautiful simplicity, the beauty of a flower or a great work of art, a life that glows with significance and value. And all the tools that we have in the Dharma, meditation, ethics, wisdom, all support that glowing simplicity. Yeah, so I think that is one of the main things I think that the Dharma has to offer, a really positive vision of how we can live. And I think we need to be alert to how much modern life doesn't support that kind of simplicity, how concerned we are with seeking our happiness in things, in status, in money, in outrage, in hatred. We live in an increasingly polarized world where we're encouraged to move to outrage within our social media bubble, within the people that we accept as, having our kinds of views, so we let them in, and everyone else is the enemy. And I think a truly simple life glows, leaves that behind, doesn't seek identity, doesn't seek security in outrage, for example. And again, it's the liberation that comes through living a simple life, a life of simplicity and contentment. And in the Dhammapada, one of my favorite quotes from the Dhammapada, one of the earliest texts of Buddhism, the Buddha says of the monastic life, or what we would call the monastic life, the life of the monks and the nuns, he said, "Happy indeed we live, content amid the greedy. Amongst people who are greedy, we dwell free from greed. Happy indeed we live, we for whom there are no possessions. Feeders on rapture shall we be, like gods of brilliant light." So that's the second of those liberations. The third, the liberation that comes from leading a simple life. And that would be a very fruitful thing to talk about as well in our discussion groups. Fourthly, there's the liberation that comes from speaking the truth. So this is not only about not telling lies, but it's highlighting that to be happy and free. Sorry, someone's asked what verse it is. It's from actually, maybe Zach, if Arshanti Garba, if you know what verse it is, you could share it. I can share it in the break, the verse number. So anyway, so the liberation that comes from speaking the truth, it's highlighting that not only is it not about telling lies, but to be happy and free, we need to learn to speak out as well, to speak the truth. When we don't speak the truth, it just has we can't, it causes an ethical unease, you could say. And when we see something that needs to be said, we should speak out as appropriate, in an appropriate way. I've been quite moved by seeing the protesters recently. That there's scientists who are in the wake of the first reports coming out from the new IPCC report, taking actions, and to highlight the situation that's happening. And they've said, well, I've just felt I've needed to speak out more fully. Yeah. And this for me is a central question around working in the area of the climate emergency. I just don't feel that reducing our own consumption, recycling, doing all the things that we've been told we should do is going to be enough. Yeah, it's going to be enough to avert what's happening. And I'm sure we're all aware of this. But one of the biggest modern ways of avoiding serious action is to push everything back on you as an individual, just needing to take more responsibility for how you consume. I do think there needs to be more activity and speaking out around how we live as a society, the kind of views that underpin the world in which we live. And one of the central teachings of the Buddha is that our views create our world. So it's not just looking at the end product of our actions. It's undermining the very views with which we approach the world. And it's a real koan. How much can we speak out? How well are we placed to speak out? And it's one that I find uncomfortable, actually. I always feel I could do more. And I think I just have to acknowledge that discomfort. And at the same time, I have responsibilities in Triratna that occupy so much of my time as well. So I think we all have to work out how exactly our Dharma practice is going to be an expression of that. And perhaps it's never going to be fully comfortable. Yeah. But I think by dwelling in discomfort, interesting solutions emerge that we would never have if we didn't dwell with that discomfort. Bhante talks about this as staying with the problems rather than looking for hasty solutions, and allowing a deeper perspective to emerge by staying with that discomfort. And then the fifth liberation is the liberation that comes from awareness and understanding. And there's two main aspects here I want to mention. I'll mention each of them relatively briefly. So the liberation that comes from awareness and understanding. So firstly, connecting with nature. And you could say there's almost a pathological disconnection from nature these days, particularly if, like me, you live in an urban situation in a city, as most of our population does. And we need to shift our views by reconnecting with nature. Beyond the pictures that we see on Instagram and the like, that isn't nature, you know? We need to remember what we are trying to save, and we need to feel in deep connection with what we're trying to save. And indeed, I think we need to take time off and go on retreat and be in nature, you know? And Sangharakshita says of this is a slightly longer quote, but I think it's good to read it all out. He says, and I'm afraid I don't have the reference for this, I'm sorry, I'll look it up later, but Sangharakshita says here, and I'll put this on the Padlet as well. He talks about appreciating and enjoying nature. He says, this represents, we may say, an aesthetic attitude to nature, even the contemplative attitude to nature. Here, there's no question of using nature. There's no question of doing anything with nature. You leave nature alone. You simply look at nature. You simply see nature. Here, nature is simply appreciated for her own sake, enjoyed for her own sake. Whether we are looking at a mountain, whether we are looking at a vast expanse of sea, or whether we are looking at a tiny flower or just a grain of sand. There is no need to idealize nature or romanticize nature, much less still to sentimentalize it. But there is no doubt that an appreciation of nature, especially of great natural beauty, can play an important part in the spiritual life. It can have a very soothing, very tranquilizing effect, even a restorative effect. And I was very struck a couple of years ago when I was reading Sangharakshita's travel letters, and he was talking about being on retreat in New Zealand way back, I think it was in the 70s. And this is in his book, which is called Travel Letters. And he talks about being on an ordination retreat. And he was living in a caravan in the New Zealand countryside. And even though it was a very busy time and there was lots of people being ordained, he would spend most of the morning just by himself, sitting on the veranda, just looking out at nature and looking out at the countryside and the beautiful flowers of New Zealand, which were quite new to him. And he would spend at least 2 or 3 hours every morning just looking out at nature on the veranda. And then in the afternoon, he'd engage with people and meet lots of people and ordain people and do all the other things that needed to be done. But even in the midst of that busyness, he made sure to spend time just appreciating the beauty. And that was always a factor in his life as well. So I'd really encourage us to take time to make sure we have that as well, to make sure we have that connection. And I think that alleviates the dangers of activism, like burnout and descending into hatred. Just having a real connection with what we are trying to do. And then not unconnected to this, the second aspect I'll mention, and I'll finish with this, is the sensitivity to life, seeing the universe as alive. We live, my background is theoretical physics. I'm a scientist by training. And I know all too well how scientific materialism can lead us to seeing the universe as a dead universe, a universe to be exploited, a universe without a deeper kind of meaning and truth. And we need to see the universe as alive, as something that there's something in the universe that transcends this dead materialism. And it's a very difficult thing to do. And the faculty for seeing the universe as alive is a poetic faculty. It's the same faculty, I believe, that we have to appreciate beauty. It's the faculty of shraddha, of faith or confidence in meaning in the universe. But it's very easy to go overwhelmed. It's the first faculty to go, I think, when we have a busy life, when we have a life of overstimulation and a life of information overload. But we do need to identify with the whole universe, with all of life, not just humanity or not just even ourselves and the people around us. So I wanted to read one of my favorite quotes again. So, and I'll put this on the Padlet later too. A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings, as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from the prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living beings and the whole of nature in its beauty. The true value of a human being is determined by the measure and the sense in which they have obtained liberation from the self. We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if humanity is to survive. And that's not actually a Buddhist teacher, that's actually Albert Einstein, talking about the kind of attitude that we need to have. Einstein was there's a lot of fake Einstein quotes on the internet, it must be noted, but that is a real quote from him. And he was actually a very spiritual man, actually, as well as a brilliant scientist. And Bhante then emphasizing this too, he says this kind of understanding, seeing the universe as alive, is not scientific. It's not even philosophical. Essentially, it's a spiritual understanding, and it consists in seeing nature as she really is, not as a static picture painted on a wall, but a living, perpetually recurrent process. So I think these liberations offer us a way of positively engaging, really living a truly ethical life and having that ethical life as the basis of transforming self and world. And the Dharmic perspective is that, all things change, all things are empty, all things are possible. And I'm just off a retreat this weekend where the theme was faith, Shraddha, our Sangha urban retreat here in Dublin. And one of the things that really struck me is that there's a very positive value to longing faith, this faith that arises, which is a longing for a transformation of self and world, a longing to become more like the Buddha so that we can operate more skillfully and more helpfully in the world. And this longing faith arises out of a clarity about the teachings and, you could say, spiritual friendship, seeing the Dharma embodied in other people. And so if we lose touch with this positive longing, really come back to the Dharmic perspective and to spiritual friendship, but by staying with this longing, this longing for a better world, this longing for transformation, our energies are activated. We will be more fully engaged and activated in the world. So this positive longing faith leads to action in the world. So, and we need to act. We need to live out these 5 liberations. So really keeping the Dharmic perspective, keeping in connection with spiritual friends who embody that goal for us, and then longing for transformation of self and world. So I'll stop there and I'll hand back over to Zach. So plenty hopefully there that you can bring into the discussion groups.
In the chat, please, if you have any reflections, things that came up in the breakout rooms, and or any questions you'd like to put to Vajrashura.
I would like to know what you, Vajrashura, think about why this wonderful quote from 1988 that you had from Bhante, you know, about how important the awareness, our awareness and engagement in environmental issues is. What do you think? Why? Oh, well, I'm trying to say 2 things at the same time. What do you think? Why this didn't spread so widely? At least that's my impression that it didn't. Or do you see that differently?
Yeah.
See what I mean?
I do. Yeah. Sorry, what's your name? I can't quite see you on screen.
Alyssa from Germany.
Alyssa, thanks, Alyssa. I think the perpetual challenge of being an order, you're really talking probably at an order level, I'm guessing. And I think the difficulty with the order is that it's almost a full-time job keeping a Buddhist community going. You know, it's a very difficult thing to do in the world. So for me personally, I just feel like I've so much to do, even just to keep offering the Dharma at a basic level. There's so many organizational and institutional responsibilities. So I think people have just had their hands really full just trying to keep the our community going and growing. I think in the last few years we've got to a point where I think there's many more people now engaged in it. I think that somewhat still has to be reflected more institutionally, but the interesting thing about Bhante's quote is that he says individually. And the order is a very strange thing to understand, even from outside it or even within it, that no one can really speak for the order. The order is a collection of individuals practicing together. So all we can do is try and do what we can individually and with our friends and with people who want to work with us. So it's very difficult to come to a Triratna position, so to speak, and to speak for the order. You can't really. So I think in a way, maybe, I think there's a lot of positives to how anarchic, in a way, I mean, politically anarchic, you know, in terms of the decentralized and so on, that our community is. But then it leads to difficulties structurally to speak with one voice. And I don't think the order can really speak with one voice. So I think in a way, perhaps the way we're set up works against that. But I see a lot of positive things happening. And I think there are huge numbers and huge percentages of the order and the movement these days working in this field or aware of this field anyway. I mean, the work of what Shantigarbha and I and Viri and I are trying to do is bring that more into things like the International Council as well. And that is going, but it's a bit slow. But some of it is just because there's so much to do anyway. And people, particularly with the pandemic, everything has slowed down so much. That's my sense. I've only been around since 2000 or so, 1999. Shantigarbha, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
There have been people involved individually. I think the more kind of collective aspect, like order members coming together, that's happening now more with the Triratna Earth Sangha. In terms of the anarchic element, well, it has. I've spoken quite a bit about this to Tejapala, who's a climate activist in Australia, and he associates with people from different religions, you know, Jewish and Christian, and he thinks we've got the balance about right, because in other religions there tends to be much more of an emphasis on a collective line, but that doesn't allow for the individuality of the order, and order members have the freedom to think anything they like, and they do. So in a way, that's a strength. That's really a strength. you know, of our order. But at the same time, it does create challenges when we're trying to address things collectively.
And it's probably worth remembering as well then, for that reason, that if there are order members who are climate change denialists, they don't speak for the order either, just as we can't speak for the order. And I've got into plenty of debates with some of them as well, you know, over the years. So no one can represent the order, for better and for worse, you know.
Okay, so I'd like to come to a couple of the questions. Savajit says, speaking truthfully can be a challenge. How to speak the truth without acting from the power mode, or how to avoid telling people what they should do. Any thoughts on that, Vajrashura?
Yeah, it's always been a tricky one, this. Okay, so I guess what I'd say is that maybe less to do with environmentalism and more to do with the Dharma, that when I really feel like I'm connected to the three jewels, when I really feel like I have trust and confidence in the three jewels, I don't feel like I need them to try and convince anyone of anything. All I have to do at that point is share what I most truly believe to be of worth and value in the universe. And when I'm teaching the Dharma, that's the place I try and come from, not to try and convert people, not to try and convince them that I'm right. We're just saying, look, this is my experience of how the universe is. And I think it really works. And I'm really, you know, this is what really brings meaning to my life. So that's in Dharma teaching. And I think we can do the same then when it comes to the climate and ecological emergency. You know, what I try and share is the Buddhist perspective. But also what I try and share as someone who's a trained scientist in my background, I try and share that, look, I have confidence in the scientific peer review process that shows us that the chances are that we're heading for, well, we're already in an emergency, you know, and that's the level at which I engage with it. I just say, I just don't agree. I'm sorry, like this is what I believe. And I don't try and convince anyone, but just share my own conviction and my own experience of why I come to that conviction. So I know time is tight, but maybe that's the essence of how I try and talk and communicate about this. And to do that, one needs to be clear oneself, and one needs to have confidence oneself. Just as to teach the Dharma, one comes from standing in the Dharma, you know.
Thank you. So can I suggest can we have a 5-minute extension just to address a couple more of these questions? Is that acceptable to everybody? Can you give me a thumbs up if that's acceptable?
And if you need to leave at 11, that's fine. Just leave, obviously.
Yeah, it's just there are a few questions in the chat I'd like to get to. So
there's a lot more I could say about that, Sarvajit, but I'm going to, for brevity, I'm going to leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. So there's a question about how the Triratna Earth Sangha organizes and the Slack channel that we use to organize. So I'll just simply put the invite, the Slack to our organizational Slack channel in the Slack there. So if you want to engage in the conversation as an organizer, then that's the place to do it on the Slack channel.
And is that on the Padlet, Shantigarba? Could we put that on the Padlet?
I'll also put that on the Padlet. Thank you. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. What have we got here? We talked of the difficulty of speaking out when something needs to be said. This is from Eric in Essex. You got any comments on that, Vajrashura?
Yeah, I mean, let's one of the things I need to keep doing is come back to the Buddhist perspective, and I need to remind myself as well that we need the Buddhist perspective. I'm not just saying it to you, but the Buddhist criteria for speaking out is useful, and I'd have to look up the reference for this. Maybe you know, Shantigarba, but one speaks upon the basis of what is true. One speaks upon the basis of at an appropriate time. One speaks out, so not. You know, you find the right time to say it to someone. You don't just blurt it out. So the example I've heard, which I think is quite funny, is a friend of mine, Damarati, saying that whenever he gives a Dharma talk, all he wants to hear afterwards is that it was brilliant, and then the next day you can be as critical as you want. So you speak out at an appropriate time, and then I think implicit in it is you speak with metta. But what you don't take into regard is whether the person wants to hear it or not. And that's quite interesting. So they're the Buddhist criteria for speaking out. So that's the main thing I'd add, that we have to speak out. And like with so much of the Dharma, and particularly Buddhist ethics, which is what we're talking about this morning, really, there's no hard and fast rules. The exciting thing about Buddhist ethics is that you have to work it out yourself. It's terrifying and exciting that you have to work this out yourself. There's no commandments that are right in every situation.
Thank you. Thank you. Kasha Devi from Cornwall says that one of our themes was how to bring the attitude of the universe as alive into everything we do. Make it central to our practice in all life contexts, rather than partitioning it off in a separate corner.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just one thought on that, Shantigarbha, if I may, that Oscar Wilde said, "It's easy be good in the countryside." Yeah, and or something to that effect. And I think in a way, it's easier have this connection on retreat. And I was on Sarvajit's ordination retreat for 4 months, completely cut off from the world. And then last autumn again, I was in Spain again for 3 months, leading the ordination retreat. And on retreat, cut off and offline, cut off from the world, and just living in nature in a forest, basically in our forest valley. It's very easy. It was just, we were really in tune with the universe, I felt at times. But it's when you're in the city that's very, very difficult. So while we need to be engaged with the world, I think we also, like in our lives, we also need times of being on retreat and feeding that faculty of being in connection with the universe. And an online retreat is great. And also I think getting away to the countryside and having a beautiful surroundings to really give space and time for that is very important too. So that's what I'll share there on that.
Thank you. Perhaps the last one, maybe Andy. Thank you for a lovely talk. What can Buddhists offer other environmental activists, as Sangharakshita mentioned?
I think you might be better suited to talk about this, Shantigarbha, because you've been involved in XOR, haven't you? And you've been doing teachings there. So do you want to say something? Okay.
I guess anybody with a kind of faith perspective, they're gonna people are gonna take notice of that it's aligned with your kind of your fundamental values. That it's not just a lifestyle choice. That it's about this is an expression of your fundamental values. So whether it's a Buddhist or a Christian or a Jew or whatever, that counts. That really makes a difference in the context. Teaching any kind of metta or Brahma Vihara practice is also really important, because to counterbalance the tendency that activists have of looking at what's wrong. I mean, of course, well, there's plenty to worry about, but at the same time, we also need the emotional positivity to address that. So to kind of counterbalance that, teaching metta bhavana. And, well, more specific things, I was involved in nonviolence and de-escalation through my sort of training as a mediator. So I was helping to de-escalate potentially violent situations individually and in crowds and so forth. So there are more specific things as well that we can bring. But just a dharmic perspective on this. Well, this is an aspect of samsara. You know, what we're dealing with here is an aspect of a bigger picture, which is called samsara, by the way.
Yeah, which is making us unhappy as well. Yeah.
And we know about that. We know about that bigger perspective. So I could go on.
Yeah. And as I said in the talk, I think what Buddhism can offer is a really positive perspective on a simple life rich with meaning, that isn't necessarily there in a more materialistic outlook. Yeah. We better wrap up, Shantigarbha.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much again, Vajrashura. Can we give him a round of virtual applause?
Going to switch to gallery view for this.
Okay, and perhaps this afternoon or this evening we'll introduce the rest of the Triratna Sangha team, but for the time being, Vajrashura, would you like to lead us in transference of merits, and then we'll say goodbye for this morning?
Yeah, so we'll do the transference of merits now, just to remind us that whatever benefit we've gained here today is not only for our benefit, but for all beings. So we'll do this in call and response, and Shantigarbha will do the responding if you want to join in with them. transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained
may the merit gained
in my acting thus
in my acting thus
go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences,
My personality throughout my existences,
my possessions,
my possessions,
and my merit in all three ways.
and my merit in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself,
I give up without regard to myself,
for the benefit of all beings,
for the benefit of all beings,
just as the earth and other elements
just as the earth and other elements
are serviceable in many ways
are serviceable in many ways
to the infinite number of beings,
to the infinite number of beings,
inhabiting limitless space.
inhabiting limitless space.
So may I become
So may I become
that which maintains all beings,
that which maintains all beings,
situated throughout space,
situated throughout space,
so long as all have not attained
so long as all have not attained
to peace.
to peace.